record this session, so I will start the recording, and hopefully we'll be able to make this available to you should you want it. And there's lots of other attendees who wanted to participate but unfortunately ran out of room, so we might be able to provide this to them as well. All right, so I'm gonna jump in. As I said, I will go through a few slides just to kind of walk you through a little bit of my thinking and some of my experience, although not, with a crisis of this size and magnitude, but what I have seen that has worked well in times such as this. And then we'll leave it open for any questions that you may have. All right, so if everybody is ready, we're going to start. It's as I said, this feels a bit surreal to me, and and it's difficult to know what is the best thing to do to really be able to help and navigate through this crisis. This even organizations who have prepared for a crisis could not have imagined this scenario. We went through the floods, and even if we had a crisis communication plan, we may have had things like reputational risk in terms of potential negative comments or media attention. But a crisis of this scenario magnitude, I don't think anyone really would have imagined this type of scenario. So, and the consequences of this crisis, although they're still unknown, it will be likely severely impact a lot of organizations. And unfortunately, I think it will bring down many organizations and businesses as well. During a time of crisis, there's always uncertainty, and I know we have all be feeling that. And again, with the bigger the crisis, as this one is, the more uncertainty we have. And the issue or the problem with uncertainty is, of course, that it breeds anxiety and fear and makes it very difficult for anyone to think and therefore communicate clearly. But clarity is exactly what we all crave at this time. Clarity is what we all want. We're all trying to look for a path or the right direction to go, or what is the right thing to do, or how can we help, or what can we say, how can we communicate with clarity. So although clarity is what we all want, in a time of crisis, it is the most difficult thing for us to do or to achieve. Now, I don't mean clarity doesn't equal certainty. So it is almost impossible for us to be certain, to know exactly what's going to happen, or all the facts, or to be able to determine for sure what the future is going to look like. So I don't mean, by achieving clarity or communicating with clarity, I don't mean communicating with certainty in terms of being able to provide all of the details or the specific path or solution. It simply means communicating in a very clear, simple language and being as open and honest as you can. It's really important to be open and honest while communicating through a crisis for many reasons. So I'll get into some of those in a little bit. And some of the most important assets that any organization can have during this time of crisis is to have clear thinking and a strategic flexibility. And I think we've all been experiencing that right now, right? So in times like this, when we can't change our circumstances, we find that we need to change ourselves. And of course, that can be very difficult. And depending on the type of organization you are and the type of services you provide, it can be even harder to do so. But it's important to do this. And I want to talk about this before we start diving into actual tactics or strategies on what to do in terms of communication. Because if you don't achieve that clear thinking, you won't be able to be clear in your communications. So it's really important for us to first do these 3 steps before we start communicating. And those 3 steps are to recognize, reassess, and respond. And I'll go into more details of what I mean by that. When I talk about recognizing, I'm talking about acknowledging our reality and the challenge of the current circumstances that we are in. And of course, I think most of you have already passed this phase, because I think we all recognize and have acknowledged and are experiencing the reality of this crisis and the circumstances, what this means for our organizations. And it's important to continue to do so, but I want you to be aware of how you respond to it, particularly on your communications. And I am talking, by the way, when I talk about communications, I'm talking about all of your audiences. So this includes your internal audience, which is from your staff to board, and anyone that you may have that forms part of that internal audience. And it's important, as well as external audiences, so anywhere from your clients and media or collaborators and so forth. And when I say to avoid limiting beliefs and scarcity thinking, it's also for ourselves. So when we are faced, as I said, with a crisis like this, and we have to change or pivot or adjust, or be flexible in our in the ways we do things, it's really important for us to be aware if in our thinking we have these limiting beliefs or we have this scarcity thinking, which can move us to not act or not do things or be scared to communicate certain things or try different things. So that's why I have that there. And of course, take note of available resources. And I know everyone is doing that now, and it's fantastic. And I think one of the things that I would say about this is trying to be as creative as you can. And I think throughout this whole time, we've seen already some great examples of how organizations are really trying to be creative and think of available resources that they may have in different ways, explore beyond what you would normally think of your resources. Then the second phase, which is to reassess. And obviously, I also think that most of you are in this phase at the moment, which is, okay, what are our vulnerabilities? Now that we understand the reality that we are in, what are our risks? And some of them are very, very obvious. If we can't continue to provide our services, then we don't receive, for instance, if you are an arts organization and you can't put your show on, you're not getting the income from that. But it's important for us to really look at any other potential vulnerabilities. So some of the questions or examples of questions that you may ask during this phase is, how is this going to impact our clients and or patrons, for instance? And I know you're all asking that. What is our current cash position? Can we continue to provide some services with most or all of our staff working from home? Or is this providing any issues that way? Sorry, I just want to make sure that you guys are seeing the slides properly. So I'm not sure if you're seeing what I'm seeing, but let me just click here. Oh, you can see. Let me just try. How is this now? Oh, awesome, perfect. Everybody's saying that it's better now. Okay, perfect. So we are in the reassess phase. So obviously, giving some examples of questions for you to think about. So how long can you survive? And these are scary questions, and you are all asking them now. And I'm sure you are all trying to find ways or that you can look for additional income and or grants or donations. So these are all things that I know you are under this, going through this period right now. And I know there's also been questions, and Emily and I actually were talking about this, is people too distracted now to even pay attention to any fundraising or calls for help that you may have? And, we both agree that at this point in time, although we are seeing a huge volume of communication and asks and from everyone, we have to understand that people are also spending a lot more time in front of in their social media platforms, in front of the TV or in front of their computers. So although there's a lot more information, we also spending a lot more time in our in those worlds. So it's okay to put out information like that. Mitigating risks. So once you look at your vulnerabilities, one of the things that I want you to think about here, and some of you have already to take some action in these steps, but I think it's important to try as much as you can to have an incremental way of thinking. So to do this in a tiered response. So when you mitigate risks, can you, for instance, do it in a tiered response? So from a minimal but helpful actions. So this would be things like pausing hiring, pausing new programs, anything that you are planning to do, but you stop because of the situation. A second level, which is more conservative, but would be to redirect resources, decrease program sizes, for instance, or close non-essential programs. And then the tier 3, which I know a lot of you had already moved into this, would be some more radical moves, which is obviously, layoffs and stoppage of services. But just want to make sure that we think of it in a tiered response, and hopefully some of you will be able to not go to the radical moves or do as little as possible of those. And then exploring opportunities. And although it may seem really impossible at this point or very difficult to see any opportunities, I think this is where I've already seen some examples of organizations really trying to seek opportunities or how they may be able to continue to serve the clients that they serve, as well as look for additional ways or new ways of receiving some donations or income in some way. So some questions here is, do these conditions make you actually more relevant as an organization than you were before? And for some of you, this will definitely be the case. And for some of you, this may not be the case at the moment, but it could very well become, your services could become more relevant. And I'm particularly thinking of, for instance, any shelters or organizations who help with domestic violence, which I can assume that, or we can all assume that this may become an even more serious issue if we have to stay in isolation and stay with our abuser, for instance, or a negative relationship. How can you continue to support your clients and patrons in any way? So I've seen a lot of good examples of nonprofits really trying to continue to support their clients and trying to do so either via phone or online or even via social media. And I think this is incredibly important. So it's always been important, but right now, continuing to show up and add value, which can be really difficult to do, particularly if you had to, to do layoffs. But investing in the communications, investing in continue to provide value for those who you serve will, in my opinion, really pay off in the long term. So as much as you can continue to do that. and provide value, right, during this crisis? And can you build awareness and reach new audiences while you're doing this? So looking for potential collaborations with other nonprofits as well as other businesses, or different ways or potentially different groups that you may not have thought about initially or ever. But at this time, it may be a great way to really reach new audiences and be able to build a bigger group of people who are now interested in what you're doing and can see the value of the work you do. And what are the most important services that you can continue to provide in this new reality, and trying to be, as I mentioned, a bit creative about that, and maybe some that you can modify. The key thing here is when you look for opportunities, and if you do think of any potential new opportunities, don't overthink it, and don't worry too much about getting it perfect or having it to be the best quality possible. So if you want to put a video out there, it's perfectly okay to just use your phone. And if you want to try a new thing, it's perfectly okay if you start doing it and perfect and adjust as you go along. But I think it's important to start doing it as fast as you can, or as soon as you can, and just be honest about, we're trying a new thing, we hope that this will work, let us know what you think, and we'll improve as we continue. Which but you know, just keep doing it, or start doing it. And finally, response. So this is when we start to really be ready to communicate. And I wanted to talk about those two other phases first, because to gain that clarity in our communications, it's important for us to at least, you know, think about those other two areas and create a little bit of a plan. And when I say summarize the plan, forget about big, long, detailed plans. This is really very simple bullet points, you know, one, not even a full page, just very simple, a summary of a concise, written down priorities. What are the top actions we're taking? And it's really important that you have this plan and share that. Depending on the size of your organization, you share that with your board or leadership or all your staff, if you're still working with staff, which I hope you are. And it's important to do that because it creates alignment, and it creates consistency in your response and in the language that you use. And anyone internally will know how to answer any questions that may come from this crisis, that you may receive from this crisis. So it's important to create this, again, very simple bullet point, very concise, but with your main areas. And so the plan should include really what is your situation as an organization, what are your priorities, and what will change. And again, clarity doesn't mean certainty, so maybe you know already some things that you need to change, but this may change again. Depending on how long we go with this situation, you may need to continue to change things or adjust as you move along, and it's important to say that. Defining key messages. Obviously, this is always a best practice in communications, defining your key messages by audience, and then thinking about where is this audience? What platforms are they on right now? And making sure that you are in the right platforms. So if most of you are in different and already in the right platforms, but just keep an eye on what is going on, particularly in social media, and see if you need to pivot again or add a new platform to the ones you already have. It's also really important to identify who from your organization is responsible for communicating with each audience. And this is important because you want to make sure that you have that frequency and that consistency in your communications. And you may not be able to just have one person doing this in a way that they can be active and respond to comments, and have that frequency that you want. So if you need to have more than one person, or if you have the capacity to have more than one person, then make sure you are very clear in identifying who that is and the responsible person for that. And create that frequency. You'll likely have seen already that there's a much higher level of communication going on, and that's perfectly okay. And I think people are expecting and wanting that. So increasing that frequency would, if you can, that would be great. And creating materials. So there's lots of resources, and I know, of course, the Calgary Foundation has added a list of resources to the CKC page, the Community Knowledge Center. I will be adding also additional templates or checklists or key things or tips to do to my own website. I'm creating a page for this, for resources. So please feel free to check in. And by all means, send me any requests that you may have or anything that you may need or that you're looking for and you can't find in terms of communication templates or help. Please send me that, and I'll make sure I'll do my best to provide that to you guys, both through CKC as well as on my own website. But creating those materials, there's lots of different, and I'm sure you've used a lot of them, but there's lots of different resources, and more organizations are providing free resources or making their programs or memberships free, so for nonprofits during this time, so take advantage of that. And then we start communicating, obviously, and you already started doing that, most of you, and I've seen some great examples on this already. So continue to do that, continue to communicate with your audiences. Always communicate with your internal audience first. If you're doing any changes or if there's any particular needs, so staff knows what is coming first before others do. So internal audiences, I mentioned before, your board of directors, leadership, management, and staff. And external audiences, it can be anything from volunteers, donors, clients, collaborators, media, government. So there's lots of audiences there. So I'm almost done. Just very quickly, some best practices is speaking with empathy to concerns. This is very important, obviously, in a time of crisis in particular, and explaining what will change and what will not. Again, as far as you know, at this moment, our organization are planning to do these changes, and we are planning to continue to do this, but this may change in the future, depending on how the situation unfolds. So it's just creating that very honest and open communication. Providing the reasons for this decision, I think it's very important as well. And it's also allowing for internal staff, but also externally, because it allows people to understand more of the need or the situation that you're actually going through. Not making any promises that you can't keep, obviously, and being as forthright and transparent as possible. And always, 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 as much as possible, using very clear, concise, and consistent language. When in time of crisis and in time of chaos, people can't absorb language how we normally do. So clarity is always, being simple and concise is always a best practice, but it becomes particularly more important in a time of crisis. So really trying to look at the content that you're putting out there from that perspective. Emily is going to send out after this webinar, she's going to send out some material that I created for you guys. And I'm gonna just come here now. You should be able to see me, hello. So, which has a little bit more detail about what I just covered. And it has, some checklists and some examples or suggestions for internal and external tactics that you can use. And it also has some templates that I'm sending out in Word format, so it'll be easier for you guys to it'll be easier for you guys to be able to sorry, this program. Okay, here we go. So I hope you guys can see me. It will be easier for you guys to be able to tailor to your needs. So we're going to send that in Word format as well, so you can use the templates if you like. So with that said, I'm going to open it up for any questions that you may have. I'm happy to answer anything any questions that you may have, and of course, you know, if you want to get into any specifics, I'm happy to do that as well. So just going through. Hopefully you guys are being able to use the Q&A and the chat. I'm just looking here. So somebody was asking, when will the templates be sent out? We are going to send those out right after the webinar. So yeah, so you should receive an email from Emily from the Calgary Foundation with the templates there. So you should have them shortly after the webinar is done. And we can also make the video available. So that one will likely need a little bit more time. So we'll send that later on, just to make sure that we send those templates and a summary of what I've just went through, the slides I went through with you guys first, and then we can send the video at a later date. We have another question here, and the question is, how much should, if any, the messaging, key messages change for the different audiences? And that's a great question, and it's something that I always think it's important for us to consider. So at any point in time, depending on the platform you're using. So if you have a platform that you know is more directed, or a certain audience is in that particular platform, then you can completely tailor your message to that audience. If you are using social media, what you can do is, of course, tailor your message in different posts. So some of your message may be the same in terms of your current situation, but try to make sure that you are including any type of information that you know is relevant to a particular audience. So for organizations who have clients, for instance, they will want to know specifics about that. But organizations who may also be using, and I hope you all are, social media as a way to try to reach new or potential donors, make sure that you're including their specifics of how people can help, where they can donate, how are their donations going to be used, why you need more donations now, anything like that. So for some platforms, you may not be able to tailor in terms of always using the same messages for a specific audience, but you can use consistent messages in terms of tone of voice and language that you use, but have different focus depending on who you're trying to reach. I hope that makes sense. And I also recommend, by the way, if you haven't done so, if you start, or if you can think of specific things that you want to communicate, as well as questions that you may be getting from certain groups, you can create an FAQ section on your website, yeah, I guess your website would be the main area where you can do this, that people can access and see any particular details. So if you can't go into a lot of details in social media, for instance, about something, you can direct people to your website or a page on your site where you have a little bit more details about that. So it can be FAQs, or it can just be further details on anything like that, any particular situation. We have another question, and it is, as an organization, we're currently tempted to increase the frequency of our newsletters to keep our members up to date, compensate for the loss of in-person events, and provide resources to support our membership while they practice social distancing. However, we are wary of sending too much. Is there a good rule of thumb for newsletter frequency? There is a good rule of thumb, or there's sort of the most common types of frequencies that people send newsletters. I can tell you that they have increased in the past, even before this crisis. But in a time of crisis, I do think that it is better to increase the frequency of your communications to all your audiences. Having said that, I don't know how often you were previously sending your newsletter out, but I think it is absolutely okay to send it with more frequency. I think it's a great way for you to provide value, as you mentioned, to those you serve, to your members, and to continue to keep them informed. You know, as I said, in a time of crisis with a lot of uncertainty, people want to feel that they are being kept up to date on information. So doing that, I think it's a great idea. What you can do, and I don't know what program you're using, but don't be afraid of testing it out. So increasing the frequency to to a level that it is reasonable for you, that it's feasible for you, that you can keep up with that, and see what the uptake is. And you can ask, again, being open and honest with your audience, and just ask them to send you feedback if they feel that this is too much or if it's not enough. And you can also see the uptake in terms of how many people click on your newsletter or go through the information. And that will also give you an idea of what they're thinking and what they would like to see. Another question that we have here is, our social channels engage members of various stakeholder groups. Should messaging that is relevant to each group be shared separately, or can it be creatively combined? That's a great question. I think you can creatively combine messages. Having said that, I don't know how different these groups are, and sometimes we have organizations that serve very, very different audiences. So I'm thinking, for instance, if you are a counseling organization and you have both programs for youth as well as programs for seniors. So sometimes combining or trying to be creative to combine message in one post for both groups could be a bit challenging. So if it is two audiences that are very, very different, then my recommendation would probably be to have different posts for different audiences and even different platforms. So we know that, in this particular scenario, you'll likely have more engagement with the senior group in Facebook and with youth in more, from Snapchat to TikTok or other platforms like that. But if you have groups that may have slightly different needs, or but are not too far apart in terms of their interests and needs, then yes, I think you can absolutely combine that, and even say so on your post, particularly in the section where you can write more details of what may be more relevant for each group. You gave me some examples of donors, family, and staff. So I think for these groups, again, you know your audiences better. So just think about it. If the information you want to send them, if they will all be interested in this. And as I said, you can say, for our donors, this is some key things. For our families, these are some key things. But it's okay as well, because we want to up our frequency. It's also perfectly okay to have different posts to address specific information for all these groups. We have another question. We've all received so many emails about changes to programming or operations from businesses, nonprofits, etc. It seems like that many people aren't reading those communications at all right now, or at least in detail. Where's the balance to being sensitive to the amount of COVID-19 information being released, but also trying to include posts about other great things, so non-COVID-19 happening in our organization for social media? So one of the things that I think is also happening, even in in normal times. And I hear this, all the time from clients, but people in marketing and advertising know that you have to repeat things so often because even in normal times, when you're sick and tired of saying something is just when external audiences are starting to pick up on it. So frequency and of that same message has always been very important. In a time of crisis like this, as I said, when people they can't really consume information as well as we used to normally, because our brains are in anxiety and stress mode. It becomes even harder for them to really, when they read something, to really remember it or keep it on top of their minds or really absorb it. Or they may also having so many different information that is thrown at them, that this is also limiting the amount of content that they can remember. So that's what I think is happening at the moment. So clarity, again, I cannot emphasize enough of clarity and brevity is really, really important here. But, do expect to, you may put out a post saying of a change and then continue to receive questions about it. And the other thing is, they may not have read that post, or they may not have been able to have the time to see it. So just being patient and consistently send out the same messages is really important. In terms of having messages or finding that balance between COVID-19 related messages and other things, I think what I would say is we are also craving some information or news or good news or feel good content. So if you have anything like that, I think it's perfectly okay for you to do that. In fact, I think it would be great. And some organizations are doing that. In fact, a lot of businesses are doing that. A lot of businesses are saying, we know this is a time of crisis, and here's just some feel-good content or some heartwarming messages, or some positive things that are still happening even amongst all of this. So I think it's really great if you can do that, and also think about how you are as well, or your family or those around you. And I think what we're going to see happen is if this continues to go on, I think it's not to say that our levels of anxiety are going to disappear. I don't think so, but in fact they may increase. But I also think people are going to want to try and find new ways to engage, or find new information, or start doing new things that they can't. Because they now have the time, or they've lost their jobs, or they can't. They have more time just staying at home. So obviously, what are some other things that they can do? And this is where I think a lot of nonprofits, particularly those who are in the arts, for instance, there's a lot of potential here, or even those who may be able to provide information for anything, if it is your area of expertise. So if it is mental health, or if it is eating healthy, or whatever the case may be, or even if it's about how to better take care of your animals, or anything like that. So as much as you can, to continue to provide information. And if you have those feel-good messages, or those things, ideas of what people can do, or what they can listen to, or whatever you may be able to provide as an organization, go for it. I think it would be really, really important. You can say that in your message, and say, you can make a comment that amongst all of this, all that is happening with COVID-19, we still want to be able to share this with you, or to provide you with this that I hope you find valuable. So things like that. But I think it's a great idea to do that. Do you have, this is another question, do you have a suggestion for balancing between the messages that we want to support our community during this time with content, and asking our community to support us? People are feeling overwhelmed, including financially. So is this a really bad time to mention our need for donations, or do we just keep that as a small part of our messaging? That's a very good question, and I think everyone is trying to figure that out and find out what is the right balance. For some organizations, particularly those who, as I mentioned earlier, became more relevant to the services that they provide because of what is happening, I think it is absolutely okay to ask for additional financial support now, and explain why. You are seeing an increase in demand, or you are expecting an increase in demand to come through your door soon. So I think it's perfectly okay to do that. If you are an organization that may not have a direct response, or your services are not directly related to what is happening now, some of you actually, and this is interesting because, and I'll show you in some examples in a bit, but some organizations, we may not think of a direct relationship between what they do, the service that they provide, and what is happening now, but there may be one. But you will need to sort of connect the dots, I think, for external audiences of why this is important. So for instance, there's one example, and I'm gonna start sharing the screen again just to show you this quickly, if you bear with me. Let me see here, okay. So an example that I wanna show you, I'm just gonna go through some of these very quickly, but so this is, of course, our own Calgary's Brown Bagging for Kids. This is an example. They have this on their website, and obviously this would be an organization that maybe not everyone would see the connection or the importance of the services that they provide with what is happening now. But because a lot of kids, as they say here, almost 5,000 kids, they relied on those lunches when they go to school, and now that they're not going to school, they may not be receiving. They may not be receiving the. Sorry, I'm just want to make sure that everything's going okay here. Yeah, that they may not be receiving the lunches or a meal that they would previously. So here is Brown Bagging for Kids making that connection, right? So for some of you may need to do that. Another example, and of course you're not seeing this, here we go. Another example is actually what Charity Water has done. Charity Water is an organization out of the US, and for those of you who have taken workshops with me, I often use them as an example. They are really great in terms of their communications. Now, not everyone would maybe see the connection between Charity Water, which makes they drill wells, water wells for people's in communities, poor communities around the globe. But what they've done here, which I think it's clever in a few different ways. One is that they are not particularly asking for a donation. So what they've done is that they found a donor that would provide them with a grant, and they use that grant. And the grant is to continue to do their work, is to continue to go and dry wells of water. But what they've done is, instead of just taking the grant and doing that, which of course they are, but what they've done is that in the World Water Day, which was just a couple of days ago, I believe, they've created this quiz and they sent it out, via their email list, via social media, and of course on their website here. And I believe if you go to their website, you'll still be able to see it. And what they've done is they've created questions like, at a time when, as you can see on the screen here to the left, at a time when hand washing is saving lives, what percentage of people lack access to a basic hand washing facility? And you can sort of pick what you think. So what they've done here is creating questions to help provide people a better idea of the importance of the work that they do. Which a lot of times, we all know that obviously having clean water is great, but we don't we may not associate that in terms of what is happening now. We may associate that with, oh, you know, kids may get sick to their stomach or have health issues of that nature, but not in particular with what is happening now. So it's great because they're in a engaging way. So these are not just posts with information. So they're not just providing you with the information, which they could easily do, but they're actually engaging people in terms of asking them questions and really opening our eyes. So I love what they've done here because of that. People really realize the importance of the work they do this way. And by the way, at the end of the quiz, if you fill out the information to become to receive their newsletter, then what you do if you're new to Charity Water and fill out and give them your email for the newsletter, you are uncovering or unlocking a new water well for someone. So they're using that donation to be able to then engage or attain more emails, which you should all be doing that to create a bigger email list, because then you can communicate with people more often and provide them with the importance, communicating the importance of the work you do. Now, Charity Water, I don't want you to feel, they've done this in a way that it's obviously very well designed and all of that, and is more sophisticated. You don't need to do this in as sophisticated as they do. You can simply, if you are on Instagram, you can just use the poll on Instagram to do this. So there's a lot less costly or more simple ways to do this. But I think it's a great way to engage your audience. Oops. Uh-oh. I think I might have done something unintentional here. So if you have, all of a sudden I can't see any of the questions anymore. So if you have submitted a question recently, I apologize, but if you can please resubmit, that would be great. So this is what they do in the end. So if you, if you're new to Charity Water, you fill out this information and you unlock the donation to continue to do the work that they do, which is very clever. These are also some examples of local nonprofits and some of the things that they are doing, which I think is great. So Wellspring obviously has nothing to do with PATS, but this is an example of some of the things that you guys were asking about, which is adding content or visuals that are more heartwarming and may not be particularly specific to what you do, but it's still significant. These are a couple of other examples. The Glambo is also trying to engage people in ways. So obviously people can't go to the museum physically, but they're being really creative in terms of what they can do to continue to engage their audience and provide value. And the same thing for the Calgary Philharmonic. So they have some live streams, and they're directing people to those, which is great. A lot of you may be restricted on what you can do, particularly if you're in the arts community or if you've lost staff, but as much as you can, and as much as artists or staff is willing to do, anything that you can do, even if it's, for instance, with the example of the Philharmonic, which I don't know if it's possible, but if some musicians could do some live streaming, and see, how very basic 101, or how to play the violin, or how to whatever, or just play a lot of artists, you see them just doing Instagram lives or Facebook lives and playing a song or two. So anything that you can do. And the Glambo, maybe there's some artists out there that can also give some classes, so to speak, or quick examples, or talk about their art a little bit. So anything that you can think of that will be really providing value, information, and engaging your audience, I think you should try and do it as much as you can. The Calgary Counseling Center is an example. This organization, they've been able to continue to provide counseling, which I know some of you who are in similar services are trying to do as well, in terms of phone or online, for instance. So some services, Wellspring is also doing that. And I know you've also looked into it, and they're also providing additional tips and engaging people in the community, which they may normally not have. So influencers are both in social media or community influencers that they can engage to help them with tips, as well as spreading their tips. This is an organization that I highly recommend you check them out. They're based in, Kenya. And they have always done this. They're great. So this is a shelter, obviously, for animals, and they're great at providing stories. Sorry, just making sure that I'm seeing all the questions, and I think I am. But I'll just want to give you this example, and then we'll go back to answering those questions. They are a shelter for animals, mostly elephants and rhinos and things like that. But they're so great at engaging their viewers. So you know they all have names. They give little stories of how each animal is doing, from feeding and how they play. And so it's almost like you're watching these animals grow up. It's like a reality show in a way, positive way, with little wild animals. And you can, of course, adopt an animal, and you see updates of how these animals are doing every day. So they've done an amazing work, and they're of course increasing that, because people can visit them in Kenya, but with the coronavirus they have closed that, but they have a great way to do that. So if you are an organization that in some ways you can do this, so either by, if you are an arts museum, by showing the art and talking about it in more details. If you are an organization that they take care of pets, then you can obviously do this, but with the animals that you have. So depending on what type of organization you are, this may or may not work as well, but just trying to think about ways you can do that. Okay, so I'm gonna try and see the questions here. Okay. Somebody was asking if our situation is dire, do we share the reality of that? And I think a lot of people are asking that question. And my thoughts on this, not knowing exactly what your situation is I think being open and honest is the right thing to do. But make sure that you're not being perceived as being overreacting or too alarmist, for instance. So being able to explain why the situation is dire and in a clear way, I think would be helpful. But if the situation is dire and you really need to receive some funds, then that's what you should try to pursue. So I would just caution, as I said, so you're not being perceived as being alarmist. So just explaining why this is the way it is in the best way you can. So I am getting these questions, but okay, so the next question is, when communicating what we can offer to our audiences and what we need for support to funders, how do we move from high-level messaging to more simple, concise, honest, vulnerable, or real writing? So I'm not really sure on obviously I don't know what your organization does, but for me, there's obviously a direct link between what you can offer your audiences and the need for support, so you can continue to offer what you offer to audiences. So, and I don't know if what you mean is, if you can explain that a little bit better maybe, but I don't know if what you mean is that to communicate that you have to go into a lot more detail and you can't be simple and concise. Maybe that's what you mean. So what I would try to do, and now I know that making things simple is one of the hardest things to do. So boiling it down to essential information can be really, really difficult. But I would encourage you to really, really try to do that, and maybe share some of the content with people, friends outside of the organization. You can send them the information and get their feedback. Because what I would recommend is do try to simplify the message, particularly if you're sending that out in social media. But then, as I said, you can direct people to your website where you can have more details about this. So if you need to have that, that more level of detail about something, then make sure you have a place on your website where you can have that. And when you're posting in social media, then it's more of that simple language. I hope that helps. While we have halted most regular everyday communications on our programming and offerings, as an example, they gave here in-person events, what are your thoughts on continuing to promote regular programming events that are online during this time? We feel that some things still need to be promoted. Could this come off as insensitive? We are primarily communicating about COVID-19 to our audience. Can we do that while throwing in some content occasionally? We would regularly communicate about surveys, online workshops. So I think so. I don't know exactly what is the type of service that you provide, but yes, as I said, I think it's important that that people, they want to have COVID-19 related information. We all want to feel that we are up to date on what is happening or what we need to do and so forth. But as I said, we are stuck at home, and a lot of us don't have our normal jobs, or maybe the level of work has diminished. So there's a lot of people out there that are trying to fulfill their time with something. So they may be looking actually for ways to do that. And if you can, and you are providing some programming online that people can access, I would certainly say so and promote that. And by the way, organizations that are doing or that do work with children, if you can do that, if you have a way, if it makes sense for the type of service that you provide to have programming or to have some things for children, I think you would be so appreciated by all parents, because a lot of parents are at home with their kids, obviously, and trying to entertain particularly younger kids, or trying to keep them active, or talking to them in a way that they can feel better or not as anxious. So anything like that you can provide, it would be great. I think the key here is always ask the question, how can we provide value to our audience? Is there any way we can continue to provide value to our audience? And if you can think of ways to do that, that would be great. Or you can even ask your audience, is there anything you would like to see from us? And see if you get any ideas or feedback, and try to do that, to somehow shape some content or provide that type of services to them. Another question is, a great example is the fitness industry leveraging Instagram, etc., to provide value to audiences. Yes, so you see a lot of that, right? So there's a lot. I don't know about you, but at least in my feed, there's been a lot of promoted posts for fitness organizations. So they're either providing, they already had a sort of on-demand type of service, but some organizations they are doing things that are live, so live Facebook lives or Instagram lives, and they're physically providing classes or exercises live so people can participate. I know my daughters gym, they are doing through Zoom, the same platform that we are using here, which you can make it, with hundreds of attendees. They're providing their classes. I mean, obviously they're modified because they're not in the gym and they don't have the equipment, but they are doing that live. So it's also a way for people to not feel so isolated, and while providing some great health benefits. And I know a lot of other organizations like the YMCA and so forth are looking for ways that they can also continue to do that. But that's a great example. But even, if you can, as I mentioned before, depending on what you do, but think about it, if you're not in the fitness industry, but what is it that you do? And is there any way that you can provide some helpful or valuable information through Facebook Lives and other things? Another question is, what suggestions do you have for nonprofits that work with domestic violence to increase services without contact? That is a really, really tough one. Or how we can make our services more relevant. That's a great question, and I don't know. I mean, I'm going to be totally honest with you. I think there may be some information that you can send out, or some, and I don't know if it's anything from things to do to decrease levels of stress, or to try to improve a relationship, or and I'm honestly saying this not really knowing the realities and what is needed for domestic violence, because I'm not at all an expert in that field. But again, I would try to think, is there anything you can do to provide value or to help your audience, even if it is not in person? But for some organizations, if you're in the health industry, you can, there's ways to do things remotely, but for a lot of us, we have to be there in person. So in those cases, if you're still able to do this in a safe way, following all the guidelines that are out there, then you will need to continue to do that. But if there's also a way that you can provide value somehow, and maybe again, this could be live, Instagram Lives or Facebook Lives or anything like that, or just content that you send out or put on your website, then by all means, I would encourage all of you to do that. So it's already 11:06, so we've I don't want to keep you more than we've said the workshop was going to go for, but I can certainly be available and answer more questions if you have additional questions. And I hope that this was helpful. It's as I said, I am available, and if you have specific questions for me, feel free to send that my way. I'm really trying to help as much as possible. It's a little difficult if I don't know the specifics, but hopefully you were able to still find some good tips, I hope, about the situation and how to best communicate. And hopefully you will also find useful some of the templates. So the templates that I created they're very simple, because I do want to help you create more simple language. So they're not, they're not your typical crisis communication templates, but they're very, very simple, and hopefully that will further help you. And you will have, some of the templates is on actually audience communication. So who are your audiences? What are the top key messages for each one of them? What platforms you're going to use? What's going to be the frequency, and who's responsible for it? So things like that, or any team. So if there's a crisis communication team, having the information of who those people are in the context, so that you can share with the rest of staff. or even, you know, if you have audience members or external members that you want to share that with. We have another question here. We are toying with the idea of a recorded Zoom message from our executive director to disseminate. Have you seen this done well? Yes. It can be Zoom, it can be anything you wanna use, or even if they just record it on their phone. I think in some cases this is very appropriate and very needed. And I think you may want to have different messages. So if you're a large organization and if this is a way potentially to communicate internally to staff, go ahead and do it. If you want to communicate externally with your audience, then as well, go ahead and do that. So I think it could be a great way to to communicate the reality you're in, some of the things that you are planning to do, the needs that you have, what are the services that you are continuing to do, or if you have, had any increase in demand. So, but make sure you keep it, as I said, clear, short and clear, not too long, as much as you can. But I think that is an absolute great thing to do if you are available, if your executive director can do that. And I hopefully some of these templates with the key communications or key messages will be helpful for you to create something like that. Another question is, how can we extend our reach into new audiences that we are not familiar with? How can we identify new audiences? Great question. And, we often get this question, and I actually think in our latest workshop, the storytelling workshop that we did, we got this question. So this is where, thinking of audiences that may be, or people, collaborations that you may not have thought about in the past may be really helpful. So one example is, for instance, for one of my clients, we are looking for, or we have engaged with certain community influencers that we normally would not have, and they have an area of expertise that is different from ours, but that there is a relationship, there is a fit, and we are engaging them. So we're going to be creating some videos where they will be providing some tips based on their area of expertise that is also helpful for our own audiences. And by doing so, we can then obviously promote this video on social media to our own groups, but they can also promote that video in their social media feeds for their audience. So this is one example of how you can start spreading your message and elevating awareness of your organization in different audiences that you would normally not be part of. Another way is, of course, and I think a lot of you have already done this, and I know the Calgary Foundation will continue to be happy to do it for any organization, which is sending out information through also the social media platforms of the Calgary Foundation in terms of what your needs are. But think about anyone else, so other businesses, for instance, that again may not be directly related to your organization, but that do provide a service or a product that can be helpful. And your message can also be helpful for their audiences or help them in any way. And there's a lot of small businesses in particular in our community that are doing similar things, or there are some platforms, social media platforms, Curiosity, I think it's called, for instance, is one that is doing that. So it's also helping spread the message about nonprofits. I know Avenue Magazine on their website, they're also doing that. So you can go to their website, and in the homepage you can fill a form and they will help share that message. So, look for organizations that may, or businesses that may already be doing this, as well as thinking of creative collaborations that may help you spread awareness of your organization and reach a wider audience. Another question is if you are aware of any qualified mental health therapists that are willing to provide online support for veterans, first responders with PTSD and their families in isolation, please have them contact you. Yes, I will absolutely do that because I do know. So there are some mental health organizations who are doing that. I will say though that what I know, the little I know about mental health providers, the one thing is that if they work in the province, they can only provide service for people who live in the province. Maybe there's some flexibility now, but given the times. But if these veterans or first responders are in Alberta, then any Alberta mental health organization should be able to help with that. And I do know specific ones that I'll have them contact you directly. Could you please, so one other question, could you please repeat the name of the first organization that is helping to spread the news of what nonprofits are needing or providing? Oh, yeah, and it's my accent, and I probably said that totally wrong. It's, I know they have an Instagram feed, and I'm sure they have other social media, they're in other social media platforms as well. And it's called Curio, so as in curiosity. So it's curiosity, but instead of S is a C of city. So that's what they are. So it's curiosity, but with a C of city. So if you look for that in Instagram, you should see their feed, and they are spreading a lot of different messages. Some good news messages that we've talked about. Thank you. Somebody put there the handle. So it's Curiosity Calgary. Thank you so much. But also about nonprofits and what the needs or what some of the great things that nonprofits are doing. So looking for those types of organizations is great to do that. And I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other organizations out there or even media outlets out there that are trying to help through their websites or social media platforms as well. So just keep an eye open for that. So I don't know, again, I'm happy to continue to stay. But if those of you, obviously, if you have to leave, please feel free to do so. And we'll continue to record, and we'll make this available to everyone. And hopefully, you'll find some of these templates and other content that you'll find useful. And I will encourage, and I'm going to share this just quickly with you here. Just my content information, my contact. If you have, any questions. So I have a podcast as well. For those of you who may not know, it's called A Branded World. So it's right here. It's free. So it's a free resource, and it has a lot of I think very interesting interviews, and some of them with nonprofits as well. So just feel free to go. You can find it anywhere you get podcasts from. So just Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you find your podcasts, you'll find A Branded World. So hopefully that's a free resource, and hopefully find that useful. I'm also in social media, so please feel free to send me a DM or any questions that you may have. And of course, my website, marcastrategy.com, which, as I mentioned, it's not there, it's not live yet, but I will be adding a page with some additional resources, free resources and downloads that you can have. And if you want to see anything specific, by all means, do send your suggestions, and I will be happy to do them if I can, answer any more questions that you may have. So that's my information there, and would love to continue, the conversation with you guys and be able to help, because we're all in this together, and it feels completely surreal sometimes to me, but I want to make sure, as the Calgary Foundation as well, that we we help organizations as much as we can. So we're all going to be impacted by this, but if I can lessen somehow the impact, then I really hope I can help do that in any way I can. Thank you guys so much. I'm seeing a lot of comments, so thank you for your comments. It's really great that that you've shared those kind words with me, and I really hope that again that you find this useful. But because times will be changing so much, please do feel free to send any new requests, ask any new questions. You know where to find me. So and I'm here for anything you may need, or any additional questions or more details that you may have. With that, I think most of you probably have to go. So do I, but thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you, and will love and to continue to help in any way I can. So thank you guys. Bye-bye.